copy of Laura Moore was appointed Director of the Knowledge Management Division with the Office of Applied Science, Public Building Services, General Services Administration in October of 2004, fairly recent. PBS is the landlord of the civilian federal government with a total inventory of over 345 million square feet of workspace. What is that, about twice the size of Washington, D.C.?
Although that's our largest piece of inventory.
Oh, okay. One might have suspected that. For 1 million federal employees in 2,000 American communities. Knowledge management as a staffed, funded business initiative is a new territory for PBS, but seen as a major enabler to bring PBS out of being transaction masters to being fully customer-centric organization. Prior to appointment as KM Director, Ms. Moore was with the Office of PBS Chief Information Officer, and served as the PBS Web Program Manager and Team Leader. She was responsible for overseeing design, development, and implementation of several business application systems, as well as overseeing PBS national web content and for delivering the PBS portal. Sounds like a technical background.
There you are.
Before joining the PBS CIO staff, Mrs. Moore held a variety of positions within PBS, including Congressional Coordination Team Leader, Rent Team Leader, and Quality Management Program Manager. Prior to PBS, she held a variety of IT civilian positions in 3 Navy commands. Ms. Moore graduated summa cum laude with a Bachelor's of Science degree and is a certified quality assurance analyst. She also served in the U.S. Navy as a data processing technician and still maintains that the most valuable lesson, some of you in here will appreciate what this means, the most valuable lesson learned, the best practice she acquired during those years was never, ever scrub out the Master Chief's coffee mug. Some of you know what that means. I was in the Air Force. I'm not sure I know what that means, but I think you might explain that to us. Okay. Well, we appreciate that, and we're looking forward to Laura's presentation. Please welcome. And Laura has a problem. It's an artificial pocket, so she can't stick this thing into her pocket. So
don't wear a girly suit. You have to do this. This is my lesson learned from today.
So if you stay fairly close, right there, that'll work.
Because I need to keep my cheat sheets here. Thanks, Doug, for the introduction. Do we not have any former sailors out there? There you go. You understand. And, of course, Tom, you understand what I'm talking about.
Soldiers are the same way.
Well, never, ever scrub out the Master Chief's coffee mug because it took him 15 freaking years to get that grime on the inside of his coffee mug, and he's proud of it. So you leave it alone. Actually, it was a lesson I learned at 17 years old, and I have never forgotten it. So thanks, Doug, for the introduction. What Dick gave you was a presentation on sounds like a very mature KM program, or at least one that's in the teenage stage. What I'm going to present to you is a very brand spanking new knowledge management program. Our knowledge management program was birthed last year, and it was a beautiful baby. Thank you very much. We are now, I would say, in the crawling stages with knowledge management. And actually, my goal for you out in the audience is that you consider your tax dollars being well spent by the time I get done with this presentation. So we really are very, very at the beginning stages with our knowledge management program. So in the public building service. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what General Services Administration is, what the public building service is. So it's it's an independent agency. It doesn't have the name recognition that IRS does. A little bit about what we are as an organization. How we got to even the crawling stages with our knowledge management program. The lady from IMF, it's so nice to see someone who's actually a little behind us. As everyone was going around the room, I'm thinking, oh Lord Almighty, they've all got programs far more mature than I. There is nothing I can tell them that they will learn from, but I was glad to hear that. Possibly the gentleman from state are in another position that's similar. So I'll talk a little bit about our first endeavors with knowledge management.
For my minute,
sure.
What is IMF?
IMF?
What agency is that?
That's World Bank.
Oh, IMF.
Yeah, IMF. That's the lady from
I thought you said IMF.
International Monetary Fund. Yeah.
I thought it was IMF.
No, but I'll talk about IRS in a minute.
I guess I'm having hearing problems.
Let me tell you a little bit about what the General Services Administration is and the public buildings portion of the General Services Administration, because like I said, it's an independent agency and doesn't have the name recognition that some of the larger organizations might have. As Doug pointed out in my intro, we are the largest public real estate organization in the country. About 50% of your federal civilians, we take care of providing them workspace and or workplace solutions. There are actually two parts to the General Services Administration. One that is Federal Acquisition Service. If you're a consultant, you're probably very familiar with schedules and that kind of thing. That's the Federal Acquisition Service portion of the General Services Administration. GSA does not stand for Girl Scouts of America. The public buildings portion, which is PBS, which is not Public Broadcasting System, is the portion that we're in, and it's actually the largest portion for the general FTE staffing-wise for the General Services Administration. Like I said, our mission is to be the provider of workspace and workplace solutions, and in essence, all PBS associates are we are engaged in two fundamental activities. We either build you a building, we get you a lease, and if we built you a building and we've gotten you a lease, we maintain the life cycle of that asset. In general, at a very high level, that's what PBS associates are involved in doing. So that's a little bit about PBS. And again, it's not Public Broadcasting Service. Let me move my glasses here. We were faced with a pretty significant challenge a few years ago. Actually, this is prior to the current administration. This would be back in the Clinton years. Our most senior management recognized that we needed to do some really significant change in the way we do business, in part to address things like the President's management agenda. But the bottom line for us as an organization was we were finding ourselves in the position of being less and less the provider of choice. Now, our customers are IRS, Treasury, DHS. Our customers are the federal civilian workforce. That's our customers for public building service. Ultimately, the end customer is the taxpayer. But for us, our direct customers are federal agencies, civilians and federal civilian agencies. And what we were faced with was kind of the dilemma where we were realizing that some of our largest customers in particular were petitioning their representatives on the Hill and asking for delegated authority. In other words, they were asking to not have to deal with GSA at all. We were not giving them the kind of quality workspace in a timely fashion or workspace or workplace solutions in a timely fashion, and they were actually spending the time and the money to go out and petition their representatives to get that delegated authority. We were finding ourselves being in the position of not being the provider of choice. And some of our larger customers were successful in getting that delegated authority. So for us, that was the business imperative. It wasn't that we were necessarily losing money per se. It was that we were losing customers who were actually taking the time to go and petition Capitol Hill, folks on Capitol Hill, to get that delegated authority. Not a good position to be in as a federal agency. And ultimately, it's probably not in the taxpayer's best interest that you have shadow organizations, that you have shadow GSAs embedded in other organizations, large part because we weren't being seen as doing our job right. So that was the business imperative that we faced that led us to, in the next administration, it was a carryover from the Clinton administration into the Bush administration, as I said, not just to address the President's management agenda, but to become that provider of choice. To take us from being that transaction masters, because we were really good at doing transactions, we still are. We were very good at cutting you a lease. We weren't particularly good about asking you what were your future needs. How long would you really need that lease? And were there other ways that we could satisfy your workplace needs, your work solutions, beyond even just space? Maybe what you need is a technology solution, and you don't have to have an office space at all. So we needed to. That's what we're becoming now. Is that more customer, more advocate, more really in the trenches and understanding your business